Adventurers spend a great deal of time delving into dungeons, uncovering lost secrets, and slaying monsters. Well, in between all the action, they need a bit of a break from the familiar. What better way than a minigame? Well,
the game, so to speak.
Well, then hold on to your lug nuts, fellas, and your dice, girls, because join us as we discuss how to create and run mini games in Dungeons and Dragons. Hello and welcome, heroes, to the Crit Academy. I am your host, Justin.
I'm your guest, Jeffrey Golden.
I'm your co-host, Ian.
I'm your co-host, Brandon.
And we hope to inspire you with creative content that you could bring with you on your next adventure.
Lots of it. We are so excited to talk mini games. Today we are joined by Jeffrey Golden, designer and game maker. Jeffrey, for those who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in the world of tabletop and Dungeons and Dragons and all that jazz? Games and
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, folks. This is so much fun. I'm so glad to be here. I'm a narrative designer for video games and a tabletop role-playing game creator. I've written for Capcom, Square Enix, Disney Interactive, and some of my tabletop projects include Helm Greycastle for Image Comics and the official Wet Hot American Summer role-playing game called Fantasy Camp.
Oh my.
Well, that put my resume to shame.
Yeah, I wrote some stuff. But I've got nothing to compare. So I'm really excited to have you on. There's lots of good stuff. We're going to be talking a little bit, not only about mini games, about one of yours that I picked up that I really enjoyed, which is Target Run. As we kind of go through that, we'll kind of talk about that as we end towards the discussion, because I think you found a great way to kind of compile all of that stuff. So I think the best way to start this off is, you said you wanted to include a mini game in our show today. Is that correct?
Absolutely, folks. Okay, so here it is. My ancient wizard wand, magical wizard wand. And I have here, folks watching at home, count the number of times I flip the wand and the sand and the little things inside go all the way to the bottom throughout the stream. And if you get it, no, that one doesn't count. That was the demo. That was the demo. Don't count that one. If you count that one, you'll be wrong. Count how many times I do it during the stream, and you will win and be the first to answer correctly in the chat, and you will win a prize.
Yes,
a rad prize.
Yes, I can confirm the prize is awesome.
Is it a rad?
It's right on target, actually, for the show. So I guess the we got to start this off is, what is a mini game for those that don't know?
Absolutely. So look, as I see it, a mini game is a standalone game that lives within a larger game experience, as opposed to, say, like a micro RPG, which is a small game that lives entirely on its own, or like a puzzle trap in a castle, which I'd call something more like an element. Basically, mini games are the games within games. And sometimes a game is full of mini games. Like just thinking on the video game side, like WarioWare, for example. That's like a classic game that is just really a series of mini games all spliced together. But then other games sometimes contain mini games. And particularly there's one great example I can think of off the top of my head. There was a magazine, a D&D magazine called Rolled and Told. And they published comics as well as like adventure modules. And one of theirs was called Ghost Carnival. And it was really, it's a really fun module if you can find it. Basically, your adventurers are like lured into an enchanted carnival run by ghosts, and you have to figure out how to escape. But within the carnival, there are a bunch of carnival-themed mini games that you can play, and they tie into the greater adventure. So sometimes a big game could be made up of a bunch of mini games, and sometimes you might have one or two or three mini games within a larger game. But that's how I would define a mini game.
And I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, I think everyone's played a mini game once or twice in their day, whether it was through a video game or in tabletop. I think D&D actually has a pretty popular, well, at least it used to be a popular mini game called like Three Dragon Ante, I think. So there's already precedent for those kind of being in at least the Dungeons and Dragons world. Have you guys played any other mini games in D&D?
No, I was wrong about minigames.
What do you mean?
I thought a minigame was a game you could put in your pocket.
Oh God, I hate you.
I mean,
A little
But
baby
no.
game.
No,
A
it-
tiny little game you can pick up and put in your pocket.
No, I have not played a minigame in D&D.
Oh man, that's so sad. What about you, Ian?
I feel like I played a few here and there, but they're pretty few and far between overall.
Yeah, I've played Three Dragon Ante. There's one I've actually used recently, and I think I don't remember who came up with this. It's not a unique idea to me. And sorry if you know who created the bomb defusal mini game, please let me know. But when I was running Capes and Crooks, I found on the internet a bomb defusal mini. It's a mini game for D&D where one person's got to defuse a bomb, and it's based on dice roll, and they have to get them in sequential order, and you can use knowledge checks to kind of help. But it's either odd, they're all even, or they're a straight basically. And their checks kind of determine what they might be, but you only give them some of the rolls, so it's left blank, and they kind of have to figure it out. And that was one of the coolest mini games that I had played in D&D because it built up so much tension.
Right.
And I think that kind of is generally a mini game is designed to relieve tension most of the time. So this one was kind of opposite of what I normally expected. I really enjoyed. So I'm really excited to kind of walk through the process with you of how the development process goes, because making a game, not easy, even if it's a small game, because you're still making a game just with less rules or on a smaller scale.
I think one of the closest times that we've done a mini game in one of your games was when my halfling monk wanted to fight a cage match. We found one, but you made and you basically made like 3 skill checks back to back.
Yep.
Good time.
Good time.
Good time.
I actually think 4th edition did it really well with skill challenges.
Yeah.
I would argue that that's a mini game within Dungeons and Dragons too. With that, what's the favorite mini game you've ever played in a tabletop?
Oh my goodness. What a great question.
I got options.
I got so many. There's so many. It's hard to think. There's one I read about just recently. I love playing D&D, but mostly because all of my friends are very busy. Mostly I read D&D modules, and then I'm like, imagine what it would be like to play this. Wouldn't that be fun? What if I had friends who had the time to play this with me? Wouldn't that be cool? There was one that I read that was really fun, where you were like, it was like one of those classic like toss the ball into like a little, like one of those carnival little games, like one of those into like a milk jar kind of thing. But it was like it was themed, the module was themed around like aquatic stuff. And so it was like you were throwing the pearls into like clams, into like the mouths of clams, and like the clams could like open and shut. And I was like, oh, that's like really cool. And it was like really easy, just like an accuracy check, just a really easy mechanic. But it seemed like it would be fun to imagine, like, oh yeah, I'm trying to like throw pearls into like the mouths of these things. It'd be really cool. Gives you a nice visual, and also tied in nicely with the theme.
It will make that great is if they're doing all these accuracy checks, and no matter how high it is, they just keep missing, and they start putting 2 and 2 together, and they realize it's rigged.
which is, I think, is okay.
It could be a story. It could be a story element too. It's like it's really not about the mini game. It's really about the intentions of the NPC who's the carnival barker, right?
I like that. And that could be a whole adventure writing itself. That hey, people are disappearing and they can't figure out why, and it's this one seedy carnival person is rigged a game so that and starts, letting them win, then puts a big reward on there. And if they lose, it's like, well, if you lose, you'll have to go and play this other game with my friend who just kidnaps them. I don't know. I'm thinking he's like, what is it? Hustling, right? Where you let them win a bunch, and then when the pot is really big, you swipe it out from underneath them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, the mystery of the casino, right? Of
yeah,
and you get into big trouble. It's like that movie. Was it 21?
Yeah.
Where they're like MIT card counters, but then they end up getting caught and they end up going into the back room. Big trouble.
Yes.
Yes.
So now we've kind of discussed kind of at length what mini games are and kind of some of our favorite ones. How does one go about creating a mini game? What is the first steps to creating a mini game?
Great. So I would say for me, it's about necessity. Like within the larger context of the campaign, what do I need here? It's like, what would be a good beat to have? So just like when you're designing a larger campaign, you're thinking about story beats, right? Like what would be a good story beat to have here? You might also think like, well, you know what? For pacing purposes, I actually need something here that's going to take them off the main quest. I need something here, a different type of beat, than they would normally have.
Right.
So for me, like a lot of it comes down when I'm first thinking about it, it comes down to theming, right? So how does a mini game streamline with the narrative, emotional, or mechanical themes in a larger game? So for example, is for some like we're talking about Carnival, right? So like that one is like a gimme, right? If your narrative takes you into a Carnival scenario, you're naturally going to want to put mini games in because the players are going to naturally want to interact with those, with those story elements. But there may be other reasons too. Like for example, you're in a tavern, right? Like, and that your players are like a little antsy. Maybe they like to drink. Maybe they like to goof around in the tavern. Maybe you want to supply them with the mini games. Like, that they aren't going to like sit down in front of the quest giver immediately and like be like, what's my quest? Or got anything for me? They like to explore. Your players like to explore. So yeah, maybe you're going to build in like a darts type game, or like a cornhole or something like that, like some version of that that they could play. They could play while they're drinking and have a little bit of fun in the tavern. So there might be reasons that your players like it. There also might be emotional reasons to do it too. So for example, your players may have just come off of an intense campaign, right? Of just a bruising, horrible campaign. Oh, maybe one of them died. Maybe one of the player characters died. Everybody's feeling really sad. That may not be a great time to send them out on another epic quest,
right.
Immediately, right? So you may be thinking, okay, like what's a fun like mini game type thing that we could do instead? Maybe it's like a scavenger hunt kind of a mechanic, something to take their mind off the big bad, off the big story, and give them some breathing room. Something, it's just something they could do to relax for a bit. So I always think about the needs of the story and the needs of the players when I'm designing a mini game and thinking about doing it.
That's actually a really interesting point because sometimes there are some classes, and I'm just going to call out the rogue right now, that part of their whole persona is the gambling and the dice and the thieving and the sleight of hand. And that is a really good opportunity to let that aspect of the game shine as well, because you totally could offer a game to everyone have fun and turn to your rogue and say, so as the dice are being tossed, are you willing to place a bet, gamble, or even stack it in their favor? Because then you can give them the opportunity to play in a way that doesn't usually come up in the traditional adventure, which I think is really good. Now, the rogue isn't the only one that can do this. Any criminal background or whatever can do it, but typically it's kind of the rogue shtick, right?
Yeah.
You know, Kyle Saunders here in chat said he loves the idea of the opportunity to have the players gamble their winnings from a quest.
Yes.
Which lets me trigger the thought of, what if your gambling actually led to a quest where they basically went to a gambling den of some kind, but it was clearly rigged against the players. But the guy's like, oh, no, you lost. Well, I guess we need to come up with a way to pay off your debt. Do this for me.
I like that.
Absolutely. Or it could be that they gambled some rare item. And they have to get that. They have to get that item back.
Oh, and it wasn't even their item.
Somebody else's item.
I love it. So you're talking about gambling and losing an item they got to get back, but maybe they were delivering and the rogue's got a little itchy spot. It's like, I don't have anything. Ooh, this thing. I'm not gonna lose it. My luck is hot tonight. Crap. So I think it can lead a lot. So
yeah, I was looking at Silverwolf's comment. The thieves and arcane tricksters could really be good at the dice rolling things, because the arcane trickster gets mage hand, but it's invisible.
Yeah. Ooh, sneaky. I think I wonder if that's proficient enough to be able to do like sleight of hand checks with it.
That's kind of their whole thing. So
nice. Okay, so we've got a theme, right? Usually, it sounds like you usually want to design a game with an intent of a particular theme or emotional response. After a big, heavy, focused, player character dying moment. Tossing in something that relieves that stress is really good, but you could go the other way. Maybe they've had a bunch of carefree adventures, and they end up in a situation where it all comes down to a game of dice or a game of cards, and everything is riding on that.
You could do like a variation of like, it's just thinking like those like mob mini games, like, and the one I'm thinking of is you put your hand down and like knife between the fingers kind of thing, right? Like you could do some intense stuff, like the characters may be being forced to play like twisted games against each other. You could do like a Saw kind of thing and like a horror one, where they have to get out of some kind of horrible game, some kind of horrible game.
I was just thinking what he was saying. It's like, I got all my fingers. I rolled a fucking one.
How's the rest of that go? Now I'm down one finger. I'll try out for another one. I don't know. But,
you know what you could?
I think Squid Game.
Right? There's some Squid. I mean, basically, we're talking about Squid Game. You could do it where you put a die in between each of your fingers. And then you like drop your hand down, like you open up your fingers and like let the dice fall, and see like which fingers your character loses. Super dark, but absolutely ramps up the tension
for that, right? And so, and you can rack up the tension by instead of it just losing a finger, the blade is also poisoned now. So maybe it's got like crawler mucus poison that paralyzes you. Then they can just do whatever they want with you. So you can stack the risks. Now, we talked about, so that shows us the different, the variety, right? From fun and whimsical to I'm going to lose a finger or my life. And I think including those can go beyond the more traditional. I think you touched on it with like the reference to what is the stupid movie, scary movie you were just talking about? People.
It's like Saw.
Yeah, Saw. Thank you, dear God.
Yeah.
I watched like 3 of them and I still couldn't remember the name. But that's a really good example because that's got a bunch of variety of kind of themes that aren't the traditional dice or playing cards. So I think that's really good. So now that we got a theme, how do you go about maybe developing the mechanics for RPGs? Right. I can see us traditionally just using dice to roll and determine the traditional dice rolls to determine success and outcomes. But say I wanted to get more involved, how would you go about creating one with a little bit more mechanics involved that aren't the traditional ones? For example, like what I talked about with the disabling the bomb, where they roll 3 or 5 dice and they have to get so many in a certain condition in a sequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one way to do that, so it made me think about what we did for your question made me think about what we did for the Wet Hot American Summer role-playing game. So there were 2 modes in that game. One is you could play as a camper, and one you could play as a counselor. So the counselor had like their own thing, but the campers, what we did was we basically created a bunch of mini games for them to play as camp activities. And so, so the mini games we took them from real camp games that you would play. So like we had like an arts and crafts mini game where like players were given like actual like bucket of markers, and they're like told to draw, and like whoever the counselor thinks drew the most accurate or drew the funniest thing would win points. Or like, we did one where it was ghost stories, where people would tell like actual ghost stories around, they'd have a flashlight and they would tell ghost stories to each other, and whoever the camp director thought had the scariest story would win. So I think for mini games, it's fun to like incorporate, especially for a role-playing game, to incorporate like actual real elements of the thing you're doing. Like even with gambling, I mean, I see it with a lot of like incorporating of mini games into like D&D, like card games and stuff. It's usually done with dice roll, but like there's no reason why you can't play blackjack in real life. Play around a blackjack. Yeah. Get out a deck of cards and like play blackjack. These things aren't necessarily like super tricky to do. And so I think it could be fun to sort of design around that. Like for the bomb mechanic, like cutting the right wire, like you could do some, like I could imagine something almost like an activity, like you get those like at a dinner like a dinner placemat kind of thing, where it's like, oh, okay, like match the symbol to this symbol, and you like drawing, and you're trying to draw it as accurately as possible on the line, like something like that could be a lot of fun, and would be like a surprise, I think, to the players.
I feel like Brandon's about to burst. What is going on over here?
Yeah, Brandon, get in here.
I was laughing at that. No, I had a thought involving mini games, throwing them in there.
Okay.
What if at the beginning of your adventure you play a terrible RPG with all the players, and then whatever happens in terrible RPG happens that night in game?
Perfect for a horror RPG.
Yeah. So if the audience doesn't know, terrible RPG is fantastic. You basically write some details on a piece of paper of your powers and abilities, and you have to tear at least like a 1 inch, but you can only use it until you tear it all away. So you got to be very precise and stuff. And sometimes the paper's like F you, and but very, very fun. And I think we've talked about something like that before. We did, when we covered solo D&D toolkit and running your own solo adventures to building backstories. That could just as easily be a tool for, mini game exploration as well. So,
and I can also see like I mentioned this in chat, but like finally like a halfway point in between playing the actual game and rolling dice. Like you guys play like a 5-card draw or some other poker game, but you use like a 5d6 instead.
Ooh, I like that.
Absolutely.
Another,
and you can be playing like a high stakes game, like you bet like 5% of your soul or memories.
Right. And I don't know if anybody knows, but to my understanding, it's very difficult to copyright like gameplay mechanics. So you could use like a Yahtzee, use the Yahtzee mechanic. And use that as a way to run a different type of game. It doesn't have to be Yahtzee. It could be a variant dice game that happens in your world, and maybe it's got less dice or something like that. And there, instead of 1 through 6, it's a goblin's head, a kobold's head, or whatever. And so it's no longer getting 4 of a kind, it's getting 4 goblins or something like that. I don't
put your miniatures in with the dice, depending on where the miniatures land, that could determine your fate, like a fortune telling kind of thing. There's I think that's great advice. And so I'd say think creative. Like I'd say that would be my big advice. It's like, you can use the mechanics that you have, but also feel free to bring in mechanics that don't, the things that aren't part of D&D or aren't part of the RPG that you're playing. And break. I think when you do that, it creates a really memorable experience. Oh, right. Yeah. Because we're gonna roll dice to determine, who got the best hand or whatever. But like when somebody pulls out those cards, it's like you don't forget that. Like it's like it's a tactile thing. It's different, and it's like, oh yeah, remember when we busted out the Yahtzee thing, and 2 months ago in that session, that was so much fun.
Who can make the tallest dice tower with D6s?
Yeah, Jenga dice.
Tower with D&D. Getting bad at things actually says, have you heard of Don John D. Nahabuk, a French parody of D&D? I have not, but that sounds awesome. Anything that's a parody is my jams. So I'm definitely interested in checking that out. So
Me too. One
thing you had mentioned in one of the emails is about pacing, and could you? So it's you. It sounds like that's important, but I don't know that I understand exactly. Can you tell us what you mean by making sure you have pacing in your mini games?
Right, absolutely. So, typically and again, this all comes down to author's intent, right? To the DM's intent. If you want to play this mini game for the entire session, like whatever mini games you come up with, like by all means do it. But I imagine the way I see mini games in D&D is that it's often sort of it could be used as an icebreaker. It could be used, in a way to sort of break up the pacing of the normal flow of a D&D session, of a story session, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you don't want it to take over the session, right? So you might be getting really into this like card game mechanic, right? But like you could play that. You might decide, your players might get super into it, and they may just like want to be playing that the whole time, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, we didn't get to any of my story. We just played this, like, we just played poker, and it's like, I like poker, but I'm here to play D&D. So some suggestions. Consider time limits. So like, for example, the bomb mini game that you mentioned before, perfect example. There's a hard time limit there. If you don't solve this if you don't do this mini game fast enough, boom, you're going to take some damage. There's an explosion. Other time limit, we're talking about like a casino, right? The bouncer comes and kicks out the players, So that's one thing. Another thing is finite goals, right? So like if your mini game, your characters are trying to, get to win a gold key of some kind. Like, oh, they won the gold key. Your mini game has succeeded, so you have a set goal there as opposed to something that could just could loop on endlessly. And then another way to test pacing, of course, is playtesting, if you can. And there's really no substitute for playtesting. With a mini game, in theory, you could play it with anybody, even somebody who doesn't play D&D that much, because it's by definition, it's mini. Right. So hopefully, mechanically, it's relatively simple. So you could teach them the rules and then play, with somebody with a friend or a spouse or somebody who doesn't play, and to just see what their reaction to it is. See, like, if it's the intent, if you're getting the intended emotional reaction, if you're getting the intended pacing, playtest, as they say.
Yes, that's definitely something that is important in any development process. And because the only way you're going to find faults that you didn't plan for is by playtesting. So definitely do that. So there's a lot to think about when developing a mini game. There's a lot of work that kind of goes involved, but seems like you're encouraged to pull inspiration from wherever you can find it, mix and match ideas, make sure pacing is good. But more than anything, it needs to be fun.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And, sometimes in game design, we come up with something, we think it's going to be fun, we think it works, and then we play test it and we find out maybe not so much, and that is, don't get discouraged. That is part of the experience. And, like as a game designer, I've gone through dozens of, little prototypes, little things, ideas I've written down here and there. It's just, there's sometimes you figure it out. Sometimes it's just part of the creative process. You're playing one game, it doesn't quite work. You're playing another game, it works a little bit better, but there's something missing. You take an element from the first game that you created that didn't work. Suddenly you marry those two together. Oh, that was it. That was the thing that it was missing. So the process of designing, of continuing to design, you get better at designing, and also you have more tools that you can draw from.
Yeah, I've learned that a lot of that when I'm designing like player options. I've been trying, to me, they're almost like tiny little mini games when you want to make a new concept, because you're basically trying to figure out how can I make this different than what already exists on a lesser scale than a mini game, because that's basically whatever character class in D&D is, is basically a mini game with inside the character class, which is really interesting. So a lot of this applies to dungeon mastering, development of monsters, and in character classes as well.
Exactly. I mean, you're basically you're trying to give the player a new experience with that class, right? You're trying to set, and you're in the design sense, it's like, okay, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this in D&D? And like, yeah, mini games, it's the same thing. Like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this type of game? If we could play this type of game, if we could have this type of experience for whatever reason. And like that's like I think that's like the main utility of mini games. It's the novelty. It's the novelty of emotion. It's the novelty of storytelling. It's the novelty of mechanics.
Absolutely.
So I want you to tell us about Target Run. Yes. I think this is a great example of the fun mini game that you can add to your tabletop experience.
I loved reading through this. It was so much fun. I can't wait to run it.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So Target Run it's actually my first. So I've been making role-playing game stuff for since 2012, but it's my first product on DM's Guild, and I'm very excited. It debuted at #1 in the community economy category, which was super exciting. So basically, Target Run is a D&D adventure inspired by my love for 80s sports comedies, like Caddyshack. Well, Mighty Ducks is 90s, but Major League, Mighty Ducks. The snobs versus the slobs, the goofball team that could pull it together at the last minute. I love those movies. I love those stories. And so my challenge to myself was, could I bring that kind of experience to D&D? And that's what Target Run is. So basically, Target Run is a sports comedy adventure. You are in the entourage of Tazvan, who is a dwarf. She is funny. She is rude. She is crude. She is wealthy. And she's hiring you and the players to help her break the elf ceiling of a game called Allagan, which is an archery sport. And it's like a team archery sport that kind of takes elements from hockey and laser tag and archery, puts them all together. And this sport is played by high elves in this a very exclusive treetop resort called Overtop Heights. And Tazvan wants to be the first elf to play Allagan professionally at Overtop Heights, first dwarf to do it. And so you're helping her do that to achieve her dreams. And the way she does it is she goads one of the guys there, the top guy there, basically into a wager that says if you the adventurers and Tazvan together, a ragtag group can beat the all-stars of Allagan, Tazvan will get to play professionally and will get to join an Allagan team. And so there's a high-stakes game of Allagan that you are playing with your team. And then there's a lot of side adventures too, because I think part of the fun of these movies, it's not just the sport itself, it's also like
the shenanigans that's going on.
The shenanigans. So Overtop Heights is designed to be, can I swear on this podcast?
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. It's designed to be fucked with. So there's like a fancy dinner party that you and the adventurers are meant to crash and destroy. There's a group of pixie revolutionaries who are trying to take back the land. The Overtop Heights was their land. They're trying to take it back, and you can join them and help overthrow Overtop Heights for a good cause. So there's all kinds of stuff that you can do in the module.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
I was thinking archery plus laser tag equals Hunger Games.
Yeah, I love laser tag. I'm a big laser tag fan. The saddest things is that I haven't played, because since the pandemic, I haven't played laser tag in a while, but I feel like that would be like among the worst things one can do in a pin. So somehow I feel like laser tag is full of COVID, and I'm not I don't know for sure. I don't know that for sure, but I just feel it.
Absolutely.
It feels true. All the mist that COVID spreading, or I don't know. But Target Run is an example of, so basically I was trying to, I had the idea for the story, and then I was like, oh, I need a sport. Like I need a sport that they could be playing. And so the module is sort of built around the minigame of Allegan. Basically it takes combat mechanics, but sort of translates them into some non-lethal and into non-lethal action. That's more about, so it's more about like physical strategy. Where are you going to be on the board? Are you going to play? What players are going to play offense? What players are going to play defense?
Right.
There's a lot of strategy that goes into the game. And by the way, Allegan is designed to be played separately from Target Run. So it's sort of like a two-for. You get the adventure module, and you also get the sport that you can play.
It's one of the
in
things
your own homebrew
that you did that I really liked about it. So overall, I'm really excited. I think if you haven't checked out Target Run, you need to. There's been a link in the doobly-doo somewhere, I'm sure. Is there anything on mini games you want to touch on before we move on to our next segment?
Ooh. Only that I encourage you to do it, because I encourage you to build mini games into your adventure. Because D&D is an amazing game. It offers so much variety and so much depth, but it also offers a lot of flexibility. And I think mini games take advantage of that flexibility. And so as a DM, especially if you're looking to give your players a new and unique experience, to a memorable experience, I highly recommend putting a mini game in your game or your stream, your YouTube live stream.
I see what you did there.
I'll be able to pay attention.
Yeah, I wasn't at all. And I'm looking right at him. So with that, I think that'll conclude our main topic, how to create and run mini games in Dungeons and Dragons. How about we move on to before we move on to our Honor tips and tricks, we have another shameless plug. Fantastic Feats of Forgotten Realms, now available on DM's Guild. One of the best parts of Dungeons & Dragons is creating your character. And when it comes to this, you can never have enough options. In this book, you'll be able to find 55 new feats for your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. Now, whether you're looking to enhance your role-playing, your skills, or your combat utility, you're certainly going to find something that'll fit your play style. So if this sounds like something you want to check out, head on over to rebrand.ly/fantasticfeats. And I can assure you, the stuff is awesome. And I'm not just saying that because I wrote it.
It looks awesome. I love the cover, by the way. The art is so cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm sure everyone will love it. Check it out.